an interview with Mrs. Grace Franke and her daughter Barbara Boyle. Were you born in the Bay Area, Mrs. Boyle?
Yes. Oh, Mrs. Boyle?
Oh, excuse me, Mrs. Franke.
Oakland, California.
In Oakland, California?
Mm-hmm.
And how long was your family in Oakland, Mrs. Franke?
My father and mother and 5 children came from England in 1880.
Is that right? Did they come directly to the Bay Area?
No, they stopped in Utah, Salt Lake City, and they lived there one winter. Then they went to Idaho and worked there during the summer, my father did. Then they came back to Salt Lake and stayed that winter, and then came to California in the spring of '82.
Yes. Oh, that was really they must have. How did they go? Do you know anything about how they traveled?
By train across the country. I think it took them 5 days. They had to stop and shoo the buffalo off the tracks.
Oh, that's a marvelous story. Oh.
And then they came to Oakland. I don't think they knew anyone here. He got a job in San Francisco, worked over there until he established his own business in San Francisco, which was a machinist blacksmith. And he was on Beale Street, about where the PG&E is now, and was in business until the fire in 1906. And he lost his business. All that was burnt out. So then he left and came over to Oakland and worked for the Union, what are they called? Union not gas and electric. Union, it's hard to say.
I don't know. Do you know, Barbara?
No, I don't.
They made machinery, I believe. They were down in East Oakland and near 23rd Avenue. And he worked there until he retired, and he was 65. And then he left and went someplace else to work.
Yes. Oh, that sounds like a very...
So he was an interest, and my mother's mother followed the next year or a couple of years after with 5 or 6 children.
Yes.
Came alone. She had lost her husband just before the last child was born. He was born after his father died. And so she came, and up until that time she had run her own business of boat works in England.
How remarkable.
And then she came here with her children, and they all were married or soon after. And then she lived around with different ones, She visited with us for a while, and then another child, and so on.
Yes.
And she was 74 when she died.
Well, I think that is certainly
It was
the
early life in Boise, near Boise, Idaho, near Pocatello, rather. There were Indians, wild Indians. The Shoshone Indians were up there at that time. And they used to come into the house and take the covers off the saucepans to see what was in them, and said, "Me, Bicky, me, tea." They wanted biscuits and tea.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, they spent the summer up there in the wilds.
Mother, how many children came with Grandpa out here? Annie Emma was one of them, but
5, I
came,
believe.
and you were born here. Did you always live in Oakland?
Yes.
Oh, you never lived in San Francisco. You always lived in East Oakland?
No, they always lived. They lived down on 5th Street where everybody else lived at that time of day.
Then were you in East Oakland, weren't you? You said.
And then they built our home on 26th Avenue in Fruitvale at that time. It's called Fruitvale.
Yes, I know that area now. Well, I think that's...
We had lamps, of course.
Yes.
The gas and electricity wasn't put in. I just saw that in the PG&E book here. I think it was 18-something here. And, well, it's in here.
And you And so you were a small child when the gas and electricity came in. Is that
So I was right.
so? You were a small child then.
Oh yes, that was my job
Yeah.
to clean the lamps,
Was it really?
the cola lamps.
Did you do it every day? Is it something?
Yes, and I ground the coffee every day.
Oh yes.
We had a coffee mill on the wall,
Mm-hmm.
and of course my father worked in San Francisco, and so did my brothers. They worked with him, two of them, and they crossed the bay, left home at 6 o'clock, I guess, so, around that time.
Across on the ferry?
Went down to the train and took the ferry. Oh yes, I rode the ferry. I worked in San Francisco myself.
As a young lady, yes.
As a young lady, I worked for the New Zealand Fire Insurance.
What did you do?
Oh, everything, bookkeeping,
Yes.
stenography mostly.
Yes. Why, I think that was, how did you learn to be a stenographer?
I went to Hughes Business College in Oakland, when they were on 16th and San Pablo.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I learned it in school. I took it in high school, Fremont High School.
Yes.
I took both bookkeeping and stenography there.
Were you the only one that was born in Oakland, Mother?
No, Eva was born in Oakland. Another sister, and then there were two they lost as infants who were born in Oakland. A girl lived a few months, and the boy, I think, was probably stillborn.
Yeah.
They lost several in England because on account of the cholera and phantom that was prevalent then. You know, they had cholera and phantom in England during the 1800s. And a great many children, infants were lost at that
Yes.
time.
That was a dreadful time.
Hmm?
That was a dreadful time, just like the time.
Just like our
the
flu here.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, did you meet your husband in San Francisco, Mrs. Franke?
No, in Oakland.
Yes.
Hmm. His father came from Germany about the same time, 1880.
And
And
it was a little earlier than that, Mother, wasn't it? Because Daddy was born in Oakland in 1882, and the rest of them were too, weren't they?
yeah.
All born in Oakland. He was a young man when he came. I think it was a little bit earlier, more like the late 60s or
Well,
70s.
yes, but my dad didn't come here until 82.
Yeah, I think Grandpa Frankie came
He
was
might
here
have
earlier.
came a little earlier from Germany. They came and were married here, though.
And then they had older children. My dad came along in 1882, and I think there was one after him. And there were, what, 4 or 5 before him?
There were let's see, 1, 2, 5.
Yeah, so he
5
was here
children.
before 1880, my
Yeah.
grandfather Frank.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So you met your husband in Oakland.
Oakland.
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, tell me when did you first come to Lafayette? Were you already married to Mr. Franke when you first came to
Yes,
Lafayette?
yeah.
Well, tell us about.
We were married in 24,
Yes.
and he bought the place. He bought 10 acres
Here in Lafayette.
right here.
How did you come? How did he come to become interested in this area?
I haven't any idea.
Just thought it would be
Just liked it.
Yes, it was a beautiful spot. and
Yeah,
so
that's
he-
right. That's right. There were no facilities, as far as that's concerned, because we had to pipe water from up this creek up here.
Did we have a couple of
From the
wells? We had
spring.
a tank house here.
Hmm?
We had a well right here too.
And then we had a well for water. This is surface, what they call surface water,
Yeah.
and they're not fit for drinking. So we piped water for drinking from up the creek here, and then just used this for the garden, for the yard.
Did you build a house?
There was a house we bought from a dentist, a little house. It's their summer home too, so we kept it as a summer home until we built in 1937.
And that you moved out
And
permanently
we moved
then?
it out because, you see, the water was in then, and I can't tell you, I guess you have the record someplace when the water was put in. I don't remember. But the water was put in, and so we could build, and also the tunnel was in, the low-level tunnel. See, we had to go over the top, over the hill before.
In the old
Through
tunnel.
the-
Yes. Tell us your experiences coming through the old tunnel.
It was pretty narrow.
And dark.
And dark, not a light in it, and leaked in the wintertime. Got so it leaked too bad, and then they, of course, built the low-level tunnel. But,
How long would it take you?
well, I don't know. I have a note here. I came out to the first dance in the town hall.
Oh, tell us about coming
But I don't know the date. You have the date
I can
in
look that up.
the records. You can look that up.
Do you remember how old you were?
I don't. That's the trouble. I know I came with a cousin, and we came in with a horse and buggy because there was no other way of coming. And our cart, we had a horse and cart at that time. And
Didn't you used to come out to the Olafsons over at Mount Diablo? Weren't they cousins or something? You'd come out and they
yes,
sometime
we came
occasionally?
out. I hiked up Mount Diablo in 1908. We had it. The Fake family and Olafson family are related. Now,
Fake, F-A-K?
F-A-K-E.
Uh-huh.
And the Olafson family, who lived at the base of Mount Diablo on the other side, on the east side. And they still, I think, one of the boys owns the Camp Curry there, that campground.
Yes, out Ignacio Valley Road and out Marsh Creek.
Yes, off of Marsh
Yeah,
Creek Road.
yeah.
And we must have come out by horse and buggy because the electric train wasn't running then. It was put in later.
Later, yeah. Well, tell us about, since we're talking about the town hall, tell us about the dance, the first dance. What do you remember?
Well, it was a big dance at Thompson's around the valley, and that's where we stayed at the old Thompson home here. The party I came out with was raised by part of the family in East Oakland. Now, I forget who they were or all about it, but I know that she was raised by them, and we came out to the dance. And it was, of course, we danced until 12 o'clock, and then they served refreshments, and then we danced afterwards. And that's about all I remember.
Do you remember some of your friends that went to the first dance?
I'm trying to think of the name. The Thompsons. Now, I think Mr. Thompson was the old blacksmith, wasn't he?
Yes, there was a
Yes.
Mr. Thompson was.
Is this May Thompson in Lafayette? Is she related?
I don't know that.
I was with her. I was with the friend who took her home the other day, and I should have asked if she was. And I see it as senior citizens, I'm going to ask her because I go to senior citizens. And if she is the same Thompson, her name is May Thompson. And
how many people would you say were at the dance, the first dance?
oh, it seemed like it was filled, but maybe it wasn't.
But it was pretty exciting. What kind of a band did you have? Do you remember?
I don't even remember that. No.
But you do remember it was pretty exciting.
It was exciting. There was two fellows there, and I tried to think. One, I think, is still Mr. Bonner. It may be with the PG&E. I think he's president now. Now, it may be the same Bonner, John Bonner. And the other man is named, what was it? Like Greg or something like that. And I don't remember any others. Because I got confused with the dance that I went to with this same woman after they moved to Browns Valley, way up here in Sonoma County. I went to a dance up there with them and drove home about 5 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, that sounded like a good party.
What? So,
do you remember what you had for dinner at the supper, at the midnight supper?
I don't, but it just seemed like there was a lot of food.
Yeah,
Maybe everybody brought their favorite dish. That'd probably be the way they did it.
Oh, yes.
Yes, it's too bad I don't remember. And I've been trying to think of this other man's name, whether he was related to the Thompsons. I rather think he was, but I don't remember his name.
How many people were out here then? Weren't very many people living around here, were there?
No.
Now, we're talking about at the time of the dance?
At the dance.
At the dance. There were not too many people.
Well, no, there was only about 6 houses around here.
Now, that's when we moved out. There were hardly any houses. When we used to come out, there were hardly any houses around this
And
valley.
the six that were here would not go to a dance. The elderly Mrs. Giroux across the street, she was old. She lived in that house that's red now. That was out in the front, right out in front near the street.
Yes.
And then Mr. Peterson bought it and moved it back. And then there's an old house up that canyon. And then there was Garrett's. I rather think Garrett's is built. It just built because it
Is
was
this the Colonel Garrett that we hear about?
Colonel Garrett that built the building down
In town?
in town. And then there's Thompson's old house around the valley. And seems to me that's about all. We all had wells, I know. There's lots of wells. And we had oil. You might put that down.
I'd like to hear about that. Tell me about tell me about the wells up out in Happy Valley then.
There was an old well up.
This is an oil well now.
An oil well up, but not in sufficient quantities, of course, just so. Up Los Arabis Road, where you turn to go up the hill, right near the Camellia place, Mr. Feathers.
I know
across
where
the
that
street.
Enormous garden of camellias.
Well, yes,
Internet?
he wrote the book that I have on camellias, and well, it was right across the creek from his place, but there wasn't enough there. Then later years, after Dr. Musser, when did Dr. Musser build?
Well, let's see, it was before we moved out here, so it was in the 30s somehow when that house.
My
when he
husband
built.
sold part of the property, 10 acres of the
I thought
property.
he sold 5 to Dr. Musser.
Well, we had, I
5.
beg your pardon, yes, we had 10 altogether, he sold 5 to Dr. Musser. And after they built the house, probably a short time afterwards, oil started to leak through the foundation, believe it or not. But they tested it. It was tested by engineers and so forth, and not enough in any quantity to build. So I don't know what's happened to it since then. I've never heard.
I think, Mother, if you remember back, I think there were originally 20 acres, not 10, because when the 5, there were at least about 15, I think, left, because 5 acres is equal to what that piece was across the way that Daddy bought later, you remember, across the street. That was 5 acres. And you know that this is much more than that.
I say,
I
it's
think
20.
the
I think
original
he
it
sold
was
him
20
10.
acres, and he sold 5 or 10 anyhow to Dr. Musser.
Well, I don't
And then
know.
Dr. Musser went ahead and bought all the land that is now off of, if you turn to your left on Los Arabis, he bought that and developed it.
And he bought the 5 down here and developed it up, what do you call it, Timothy Lane. And he just passed away. He just,
Well, that is very interesting to hear about the oil wells. And
I don't know when the
Happy Valley.
Eastern water came in. Yes, it's surprising. Well, we did. My husband had he had a load of rock or something brought in from Mount Diablo, and that had a petrified clamshell. And he foolishly gave it away. He gave it to a man who had a restaurant in Oakland, and he didn't care about it at all.
Well, all of that rock was the rock that was around the fish pond and the barbecue over at the big house. But we had the swimming pool.
Well, wait a
and the
minute now.
barbecue.
Wait a minute now. So you're going to tell us that was this house already built then, and this is when you were building the house that you.
No, with the house that we built was over across the creek.
I see.
We used a small house out here for summer
Yes.
until we built the house across the creek. Yes, and this was built years later. This house is only about what? Well, 15, 20 years old, I guess, something like that.
Well, tell us more then. As you were building, what was it like? You had Barbara said you had a swimming pool, and you had. Do you want to describe the swimming pool and the pavilion, or?
We had the pavilion. My husband built that because he belonged to Masonic Lodge, and they used to have dances out there. And that was built before anything else. No, the cottage was here first because that was bought from somebody else. But then he built the pavilion, and that's all there was. until 1937 when we built the house.
Well, the pool was
And the
before
pool
the
was
house.
built about 3 years before that.
So you had lots of recreational facilities out here for all your friends and
Yeah,
groups of people like
yeah,
Sonic
until
Club.
we lived out here.
Oh, that was a
We used to have lots of picnics.
yes. Well, what was the rest of the valley like? Were there farms? Was there vegetable gardens? Were there
No,
grain?
mostly,
What did you
mostly
grow?
cattle across the
Cattle.
street here. I don't think anybody raised anything particularly except their own, you
Mr.
know.
Casso always farmed. Mr. Casso around the valley always farmed.
Casso, oh yes,
Yeah, Mr.
Casso,
Casso.
yes, he owned about 10 acres or
He's
more.
still there.
What did he grow, Barbara?
Well, I think you'd have to
Remember?
ask John over there. I think he's still living there, and I don't know about his mother and father, but it's, all the years that I can remember onions and such out there, and he's still farming
Tomatoes.
that land.
So vegetables.
It's right
Tomatoes.
across, right near the Happy Valley School.
Yeah.
And,
Well, that's part of their property,
was on part, yes.
Mm-hmm.
the Lafayette School up there.
A Happy Valley School.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that sounds really.
Mostly, the cattle ranch was up Los Arabis before Dr. Musser bought that, and it was farmed by the Alexanders. I remember that. Remember going up and seeing them cut the horns off and brand the cattle.
Oh, lands.
Oh, it was awful. And then the Happy Valley wasn't paved. There weren't too many cars out here. They'd drive the cattle down the road, and we'd run up and shut the gates so the cattle couldn't come in. You saw some orchards. Mr. Malley had someone that tended to his place there. He didn't live there. And later on subdivided, which became, North and South Peardale and all of
Yeah,
that
there wasn't
area.
anything in Mally's place
No.
except a house, a summer
And
house.
not much of one of the early homes around here was the Gummos home, just at the curve up there, and the
Who's?
other Gummos. Mr. and Mrs. Gummo built before
Oh,
we did.
well, yeah.
And Mr. and Mrs. McGuire lived around the valley, and they
Well,
were
they were the oldest, Mr. and Mrs.
and
McGuire.
she was a Mulligan, wasn't she? Before she was Mrs.
Yeah,
McGuire.
Milliken.
Mulligan, and
I think she still
Eileen,
is
I think,
living.
is still alive, her niece. And the Petersons, of course, lived across the street from us from the time I was 8 years old, as I remember.
Do you know Mrs.
I mean, I
Olivera?
was 18 months. Phyllis was 8. Pardon?
Mrs. Olivera.
Oh, sure.
No, I'm asking.
Was she a neighbor to the
No,
Olivera?
she lived in Lafayette, I think.
She lived in Lafayette.
Mrs. Armanino, too, has been around a lot of years, too, in Lafayette. And Mrs. Wilkinson, of course.
Yes.
Oh, yes, Sybil Wilkinson, you know her, you have her.
Yes, she talked to us, and we
She's
have.
related to Mr. Brown, the original
Yes.
settler.
Yes, and lived in his house. Well, she was born in his house. Well, let's see now. I wanted to hear all about the pavilion, and it just sounded like it was a beautiful place to have a picnic and to have. And you had a dance floor too.
We had a dance floor from the old. What was the name of the restaurant in Oakland?
I don't know, it was a white pine dance floor. That was in the pavilion. It was a large building, completely enclosed, roof and all, with a fireplace at one end, and the stables were over on that side of the creek. And then throughout the creek there were picnic tables. So, and as my mother said, the pool was built before we built our big home in 37. I think it was around in the 34, 35 that the pool was built. And various groups had their picnics and barbecues and dances, and they played baseball in the field, and they went swimming, and it was really a lot of fun. And as kids, we remembered because they used to have nice ice cream and soda pop.
And this would be. Would you spend your whole summer out here?
We always
just
came out
on
summer
weekends?
vacations and weekends because my dad's business was in Walnut Creek. He owned the Walnut Creek Cannery. And I don't know when he bought it. Do you remember, Mother, when he came out here?
No.
Would you excuse me a minute? Now I'm going to turn this over. Yes. Tell us about the cannery that your dad had in Walnut Creek, Barbara.
Well, it was a tomato cannery. He used to
For
kind of-
Campbell.
For well, he
For
it was-
Campbell Company.
he sold mostly to Campbell Soup Company, and they would ship to Camden, New Jersey, but they made tomato paste and tomato puree, tomato ketchup. And it was kind of local industry. It was situated where the Gemco store is today. I don't recall, and I guess my mother doesn't recall the year it was bought. Previous to that time, my father had a pickle factory in Oakland, made pickles, and his partner was Mr. Hellman. And then they purchased the Walnut Creek Canning Company and ran that for a number of years, even after Mr. Hellman's death. And then my dad sold it to Hamilton Davis.
Tell the history of the cannery that some man.
Oh no, that's not pertaining to the history of the area.
Well, then you remember the
Here's your
cannery,
son.
Barbara.
I remember it